This is the Ready Set Podcast, and here's your host, me, Joe Persinger. Hey, how was your week, you fucks? Welcome to Ready Set Podcast. What a show do we have for you this week, this year, should I say. We are now live on all of our podcast platforms. That's going to be YouTube, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Welcome to 2020, bitch. The last 2 weeks of the year are always so brutal for me. You know, the news goes into a standstill. People are traveling. The weather turns cold. I mean, it's like 60 degrees here in Florida. It's a real pain in the ass. But those dreaded 14 days are now behind us. And now we got the NFL playoffs, the Super Bowl, and then, unfortunately, the sports drought of March begins. And I don't want to hear anything about the NBA or the Nike Basketball Association, as I like to call it. The podcast, as I've said before, is boycotting the leftist sports, communist, cow-towing sports league called the NBA or the Nike Basketball Association. We've got one hell of a podcast this week. The Chicago Bears are out of the playoffs and have a bigger question mark at quarterback, like a pubescent teen soy boy who plays football for the freshman team, but is also the head cheerleader for the varsity team. A former NBA and Chinese Basketball Association player feels the Chinese government's wrath. The Captain's Log Day 2 is back, and in the staff report, we're going to look at the Inspector General's report about the FBI, the FISA courts, and the botched Russian investigation the FBI opened up on the Trump campaign. Yeah, it's some wonky stuff this week. This is your one-stop shop current events and politics podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. Are you ready? Set podcast! All right, so early in December, Fuller House debuted the first part of its final season. I guess this would be upsetting, but considering I had the show canceled on me in the mid-90s by fake news Disney, but, you know, since Netflix is kind enough to be upfront about this being the last season, it's a little easier to digest. Speaking of which, we got Curb Your Enthusiasm come out in a few weeks. That's very exciting. And I got to add here, you know, going back to Fuller House, that social media has had a huge impact on giving success to these shows via, you know, actors' Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever have you. I mean, who am I kidding? We all know this access comes via these social media sites, but my point is they give you so much access that you never had in the early 90s, you know, growing up in that TV era like I did. So it's great, you know, and I love it because when you see a certain scene that you recognize from a post from a few months earlier, you can kind of say, hey, this is what I was doing when on this day of the month when they shot this particular scene. And I know, yeah, that's kind of stupid, but in a way, I guess it's how my mind works. Okay, so Bustle, which is a woman's magazine founded by a Jewish male, go figure on that one, has a beef with Fuller House this season. Non-plot spoiler-ish alert. Fuller House management let Kirk Cameron have a small cameo on the show. Oh, God, the horror. Now, for those of you that don't know, Kirk Cameron is Candace Cameron's older brother. If I got to take that a step further, that would be DJ in the show, her older brother in real life. Now, the episode Kirk Cameron was on, DJ directed, so I assume that that's probably where the phone call came from. Now, the Bustle article uses anti-conservatives' Christian tidbits as the crux of the reasoning for DJ's older brother in real life, Kirk Cameron, why he should be blackballed from progressive Hollywood. The article, or the Bustle magazine article, goes on to say, or says, quote, when appearing on Piers Morgan Live in 2012, Kirk said that he thinks homosexuality is unnatural. I think it's detrimental and ultimately destructive to so many of the foundations of civilization, Kirk said. After receiving criticism for his statement, the actor attempted to clarify on the Today Show and on his Facebook page by claiming he loves all people, but stood by his anti-gay stance since he's a Bible-believing Christian. The article continues, besides his anti-LGBTQ rights and anti-choice views, he also is anti-evolution, telling people that he believes Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species influenced Adolf Hitler. Oh, leftist magazines. You gotta love how they plant that he might be a Nazi seed at the end of that last line. I mean, they don't outright say it, but they just kind of leave enough wiggle room there for you to be like, what's Kirk Cameron talking about Adolf Hitler for? The magazine that was founded by a Jewish man and calls itself a woman's magazine is so quick to damn Cameron, who dares to wear his beliefs on his sleeve at a personal cost to him. Outside of Growing Pains, when was the last time Kirk Cameron was on a movie or a TV screen? I'll wait. That's what I thought. So, with all this disdain for the religious older Cameron sibling, Bustle must have really been upset with Kirk's little sister, who also happens to star in the series, as we just discussed, and has directed a few episodes as well, when she defended an Oregon bakery that refused to bake a cake for a same-sex couple in 2013 on The View, saying it was about freedom of association and constitutional rights. Do you think they put about, a paragraph or two about Candace Cameron's anti-gay stance? Nope, not a peep. Because the show exhibits, Fuller House that is, a few same-sex pro-LGBTQ 4069 plot lines. Is that what they call it these days? LGBTQ, you know what, that's what we're just going to call it. LGBTQ 4000, because every day it's something fucking new. So anyway, Bustle kind of lets her slide because Fuller House has LGBTQ 4000 plotlines. Bustle, the magazine, founded by a man, a Jewish man. I don't know why I keep saying Jewish man. It really has nothing to do with his religion. I am all about the Jews. Love the Jews. Love them. But again, Bustle, founded by a man, for women, gives Candace Cameron the younger sibling with a pass, but with an asterisk. That's not really what my overall concern is. This is clearly a gender bias. Everyone knows that side of the political spectrum will eat their own. The left will eat their own at any slight towards the gay community, or community. That's redundant. And a conservative Republican woman, like Candace Cameron, who spouts anti-gay sentiments on The View, is a hot target. So why Candace is getting a pass is not that much of a mystery. Bustle, founded by a man, for women, still has to sell magazines and digital media sales. So they have to show Candace and women in general in a positive light. So it clearly behooves them to sugarcoat her anti-gay views by saying, yeah, she said this, but the show does this. I don't know. It's just kind of just a weird way to straddle that line. But print and digital media is dying, like a moderate Democrat on this impeachment hill. I'm done with this. All right, so don't tell me, I'm looking at you, Dad, you're one of those Chicago Bears fans over the last month that thought the Bears were going to go on a mid-November run after losing to the Rams on Sunday night in Week 11. Remember the state of the Bears at the time? The monsters of the Midway were 4-6. Trubisky was launching bombs more inaccurate than a North Korean colonel. The play calling by last year's Coach of the Year, Matt Nagy, looks bland, lacks a formidable scheme, and has barely any adjustments made to its defensive coordinators throw the kitchen at the Bears' lackluster offensive line. They lost that game to the Rams, which was the first nail in the proverbial season's coffin. Over the next 3 weeks, they unimpressively beat a horrible Giants team, an injured Lions team that didn't even have Matt Stafford, who actually gave the defense a run for its money with that backup QB. That Thursday, the Cowboys wandered into Soldier Field and limped out, still in first place in the NFC West. 10 years ago, the NFC West was just as shitty. And it's amazing how that division just can't stay competitive. I mean, it's so uncompetitive that they have a 500 team going into the playoffs this year. Jesus. Did Trubisky step up his play over the last month, or is it all just that 3-game winning streak? Sure. But against those mediocre teams, he only mustered 7 touchdowns and 4 ducks, or interceptions. That's horrible. Horrible. If Trubisky was the guy, he should be gashing these teams like a surgeon carving a turkey at a homeless shelter while making it rain dollar bills while a fight club breaks out with side bets going on by the table the cranberry sauce is being distributed at. But that doesn't stop the Chicago left-wing cake box media from pumping the team up like a Jordan Belfort stock, knowing that this team was going to have a murderer's row of high-end playoff-bound teams on the last quarter of the schedule. They played a competitive game all the way up to the end against the Packers, but they lost, and Trubisky just keeps throwing ducks. They had the Chiefs that Sunday on a Sunday night game, which was I don't know why NBC didn't flex that one out. And well, if you expected the Bears to win that game, you probably think the White Sox are going to contend in the AL Central this year. Again, looking at you, Dad. None of it matters anyway because the Vikings beat the Chargers in Week 15, eliminating the Bears from playoff contention. And that's the final nail in the no playoff coffin. So I'm sorry, but this Bears team is overall on a downward spiral with a championship top 5 defense wasting away. How you have a dynamic coach of the year regress with this inaccurate quarterback and lackluster offensive line is beyond me. It's like 2 different teams. What Nagy showed last year was a coach willing to get creative in order to showcase his team's strong points. It was Nagy's play calling. It was his scheming that allowed the Bears to score points and take advantage of all those takeaways the defense was giving them. And although the defense hasn't been producing turnovers and takeaways like it did last year, which is actually a point to Vic Fangio, because they brought in Chuck Pagano, which I rallied against. I did not like that. The pogo stick is not even that. It's just a stick. It's driftwood. So we're changing Chuck Pagano's name to driftwood. Because that's all it is. They're if you look at the production of the defense this year versus last year, it's 2-1. Vic Fangio was producing way more turnovers, almost on a 2-1 ratio. It's insane how you have almost the same defense. Sure, it's beat up a little bit, but you're a coach. Make the adjustments, Pagano. Oh, can't deal with fucking Chuck. Fuck Chuck is what I got to say to that. But anyway, regardless of the defense and its lack of success this year, it's still not an excuse for an offense that soared last year that now looks like an anchor that will sink this team in the long run. So even before the Thanksgiving winning streak, even before Trubisky showed some flashes of what he can be, even before Akeem Hicks went out with an injury, it was pretty obvious that whichever teams are going to fight and claw their way into the playoffs in the NFC was going to have no less than 6 losses. In Week 2, the Bears beat Denver. But the ugly win convinced me this team was hot garbage right out of the gate. I even got the Facebook post to prove it. The Chicago Bears' success this year was a mirage. It's like a Democrat claiming our national debt is spiraling out of control. When they lost to the Rams, I knew the season was cooked. This team, this quarterback, this coach are now on borrowed time. Is Nagy on the hot seat? Not yet. But the Giants just fired their shit coach after 2 years. The Browns just gave Kitchens his walking papers after 1 year. So I'd say he's safe for now. Excuse me. If he gets the same results next year, he'll be canned. And Ryan Pace won't be too far behind that swinging door. All right. So a basketball player held his head down during the national anthem, and the government was quick to respond by fining the player and forcing an apology for the devastating infraction. People on the political right most likely have no issue with this hard-handed way of dealing with a perceived slight to the anthem, and I'm sure the political left is morally outraged for someone freely expressing themselves, pivoting, and then blaming Trump, because that's how the left operates. But what if I told you this didn't happen in the United States? What if I told you this was a scene at a CBA game, Chinese Basketball Association game, during the playing of the Chinese national anthem. Now things a little bit different politically. A former first-round pick by the Celtics found himself in some hot egg noodle broth flanked by burnt egg rolls for looking down during the cha-cha-cha-cha-cha Chinese anthem.
And that's Ready Set Podcast on Twitter in care of Joe Persinger at 420 Chicago Avenue.
And this former first-rounder caught the ire of the Chinese government. So if you're on the political right, you find yourself agreeing with China. Well, that's weird. If you're on the left, a political side that is sympathetic to China and most, First Amendment rights, and most oppressive governments too, you find yourself saying, fuck that guy. But now, I bet you're sitting there scratching your head when you find out it's China who's oppressing free speech. It's a great example of how cancerous all this polarized tribalism is. It's another example to something I've been saying on this podcast since the beginning. Each extreme political view will intersect with the other side the more extreme that it gets. And overall, this is a great reason to consider why big government is never a good thing. In either system, capitalist or communist, too much government leads to too many problems that outgrow the vessel that's created to stem said problem. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you communism is bullshit. It's bullshit when you're trying to manage 330 million people. It's not going to work that way. Now, will communism work with 5 people? 4 people? Maybe 10 people? Where it breaks off? I'm not sure. But I don't think either system is built to handle capitalism. I think if I'm being honest, I think capitalism is, it's like choosing between being shot in the head or shot in the chest 5 times. Again, that's probably pretty bad. But communism is only going to work with small groups of people. It's not going to work with large groups of people. And it works in the reverse. Capitalism isn't going to work with 10 people because one guy's got to be calling the shots. Communism isn't going to work with 330 million people because the only way to control a group of people, a huge group of people like that in a communist system is you got to have a gun. It's just that simple. So for all you jackasses that threaten to leave the country because you can't stand this 45th president who's on his way to being reelected this year, I'd make sure you do your homework before you go to a country like China, Canada, anywhere in Europe. Hold on. What's that, Klaus? No celebrities have moved away since 2016? The celebrities that do live outside the USA are super rich and were already established abroad before the 2016 election. Okay. Just checking. All right, so if you're going to have kids, it's probably a good idea to actually, raise them and not treat them like your favorite pair of shoes or that fake Birkin bag you like to pass off as real that you bought on the streets of New York. Your kids are your kids. They're not a fashion accessory. So a lady in a small village in Alaska decided to go out, leaving her kids at home all alone. Now, if you're in a small Alaskan remote village, where are you going? Is it really hard to find the mom at that point? Like, there's maybe one watering hole, unless she's hanging out in the woods in 40-degree below weather. So she's probably in a bar somewhere, or the 1 or 2 bars that are in town. Anyway, with the cold weather, a snowstorm, no power at the house, the 5-year-old decided to carry his infant brother to the nearest neighbor's house in minus 40-degree weather with no shoes for a half a mile. So I have a question. If we fast forward to 2075, does this kid use I used to walk a half a mile in below 40-degree weather carrying my infant brother without any shoes? Well, I guess time will tell there. And here's a more important question. Oh, maybe not more important, but it begs to be asked. Why is this kid snitching on his mom? She left you home alone. Okay, so there's no power. I get that. But you're 5 years old. Technology is at its peak right now, but between tablets, iPhones, such and such. You should be in bed staring at an iPad watching Doc McStuffins with a warm glass of hot chocolate. Getting ready for bed. this is where the parents kind of come into play. So someone needs to tell this little kid about the snitching rule. I hear those small village streets in Alaska are rough during the winter. The gangs live in caves, they wear fur as clothing, femur bones as bludgeoning weapons, and they have this long, scraggly hair that's also matted. Anyway, at the very least, don't feel sorry for this kid. He clearly has the hairiest balls in that remote village. Maybe I should say furriest balls. Okay, it's time for the Captain's Log. Captain's Log, Day 2. I was awoken last night to the sound of one of my roommates walking into the brig. My cabin. His name was also Joe. Hours later, the next roommate came home and spent the night in the bunk underneath me, whispering to his girlfriend sweet nothings about nothing. I promptly put in my headphones and went to sleep. The last day in Maui was nothing but meetings, trainings, more meetings, meeting senior leadership, more ship training, and an open book safety quiz, which was beyond easy and really makes me question the bureaucracy in the United States Coast Guard and how they foist regulations onto these ships that probably don't even want the regulations in the first place. What business does? I'm still lost on this ship. I was trying to navigate my way to the mess hall and ended up missing the proper staircase to get there. It's on the 4th deck, which is 2 decks above me, but when I went up there, I ended up in the hallway with nothing but a bunch of cabins. Or were they brigs? Cabins. We had the night off, so I was able to watch the ship leave port. That was fun. There's a section on the 13th deck that is reserved for crew members, which really means they just store lawn chairs and tables up there, so they let us use the storage space to stare at the water and some land. But there are some great views. The seas were angry that day, my friend. You could feel the ship slightly listing side to side as it made its way out of the Maui surf. And of course, I stuffed my face in the mess hall an hour before we left. The seas were rough. The seas were so rough, the pool on the top deck was sloshing back and forth like a pickup truck redneck jacuzzi driving down the main drag while you dodge liberals invading the local vegan-free donut shop, which is most likely a communist front for a collective of shims and lesbians.
And that's Ready Set Podcast on Twitter in care of Joe Persinger at 420 Chicago Avenue.
Tomorrow's going to be a long day. We'll be in Hilo by the morning, and I've got more meetings, and I finally get to train in the upscale Liberty restaurant tomorrow at 5 p.m. after I get to meet the captain on the bridge. Now I have to figure out how to get to my room. When the ship moves, they close the watertight doors on the 2nd deck, which is basically, they're these doors that, so when the ship is moving, they have these watertight doors that seal, which I guess is nice because if the ship is grounded, I'm not going to drown. But it really makes walking around those bottom decks and getting to a staircase extremely difficult. And it also complicates the ability for me to find my room. My room in an efficient manner. I know, so cryptic. But I'll explain more next week in... We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Tell me something I don't know. Tell me.
Uncle Joe's Lemonade. Hand-picked lemons from the organic brick-and-mortar corporate giants. It's hand-squeezed like Robert Kraft in a Miami area massage parlor. A drink so refreshing, it quenches your thirst faster than a virgin in a whorehouse after overdosing on Viagra. Sweet like the girl next door you tried to sleep with, and tart like the girl who took your virginity in an Embassy Suite hotel while your friends drink the night away in the other room. We use the freshest local ingredients and apply an old family recipe that was stolen from the Egyptian tombs during the Victorian raids of the 19th century. Ethics? What ethics? We're making lemonade, bitch. Uncle Joe's Lemonade. It's sweet. And now, back to our show.
Tell me something I don't know. Tell me.
The New Hampshire Attorney General says there's no reason for the nation's highest court, the Supreme Court, to weigh in on the state's so-called free the nipple case. What is the free the nipple case, you ask? Well, a city ordinance in New Hampshire bars the showing of the female breast with less than a fully opaque covering any part of the nipple, according to fake news NBC. Two other women, Heidi Lilly and Kia Sinclair, were busted 3 days later while baring their chests at the same beach in protest of Piro's arrest. Okay, so clearly I screwed that up a little bit. I guess some lady was arrested for violating the city ordinance. Then these two other ladies, most likely leftist activist Democrats, were busted by the same ordinance 3 days later at the same beach in protest of the first lady who got arrested. The two women, challenged their conviction all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, losing every step of the way. So this is kind of like kind of what we were talking about during the Kirk Cameron segment about what his sister did about supporting the Baker case. Because there was a situation, I think the original one stemmed in Oregon, which is the one she supported 6-7 years ago. And then when the Supreme Court narrowly ruled on that case, another same-sex couple, I think, went into a Colorado bakery and basically tried to do the same thing, with the overall goal being to get that complaint to the Supreme Court so the judges will rule on it and effectively create a law through the judicial branch instead of, going to their elected officials to get these laws passed through Congress, which the Democrats have right now. But they don't, because legislating law in this country is too hard. So anyway, that was probably their motivation here. So the women challenged their courts all the way to the state's highest court, and they lost every step of the way. So basically they appealed till they got to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So now the high court, the state high court, is deciding on if it should take the case. And this is classic liberal Democrats. They always want to bend the law so it can work two ways to their benefit. New Hampshire argues that the court shouldn't even bother with this case because there's laws in the state that recognize a woman's breast is considered nudity. Interesting. The state cites revenge porn laws and another law that makes it a crime to secretly observe or photograph someone's private body parts. This is what I mean by these liberal Democrats wanting your cake and eating it too, and then taxing the fuck out of you for it, bending the law both ways to their benefit. So if you liberal feminazis want to walk around naked on the beach, you can't ask the state to persecute that weirdo trans guy you met at the vegan plant-based hippie soy market, who is now uploading that special video you both made along with a collage of nude photos you had sent him over the last 2 weeks. And think of the Pandora's box that would open up if the Supreme Court overturned this New Hampshire State Supreme Court ruling. Ladies can now have their bits out and about, and then on top of that, if you distribute pornography that she sent to you of herself, you'll be prosecuted. Having their cake and eating it too. And then there's the other side of the coin. You know there's going to be some weirdo perv sect of the male population that is going to want that same exact right extended to them. No thanks. I've been to Burning Man before. I've seen Seinfeld. The male body is a utility. It's not a work of art. If you want to be fucking naked, do it in your backyard. Go to Burning Man. Just cover yourself up in public. And like I said, if you want to lay naked, do it in your backyard, you fucking weirdo. So fake Newsweek and Politico, they're hilarious in a derogatory kind of way. They, like the rest of the fake news corporate media, denounce Fox News for being state TV. It's not. They're always quoting Libertarian Judge Andrew Napolitano's negative opinions about Trump and anything Republican like he's the end-all foil to President Trump and the Republican Party. The motive behind this is kind of baffling. In one instance, the aforementioned news operations and the rest of the corporate media will say, "You can't trust Fox News. It's state TV." Then, like Newsweek or Politico, they will post stories to the internet or their digital media side of the company that give credence to the opposite opinion. So basically, as long as Judge Napolitano is on Fox News or Fox Business Channel disparaging Trump in any shape or form, all of a sudden Newsweek and Politico are literally making headlines out of it. So on one hand, you have both these news, quote-unquote, news companies saying that Fox News is creating fake news or it's faux news or, that they're working in conjunction with the White House. But then when Judge Nap says something, or Judge Napolitano goes on Fox News, Fox Business, one of those. I tend to see him a lot on Varney and Company when I watch that one in the morning. But he does random hits on either show, and whenever he says something that is pro-Democrat side, all of a sudden it's newsworthy. And like I said, they literally make headlines out of it. And they do this because it pushes the narrative they're attempting to promulgate. That Trump is bad for America, like a naked pedophile running around a Chuck E. Cheese after taking a few Viagras. It only goes to show you how deranged some elitist media types are, that they are willing to cut down their own credibility and words to push idealisms that only they and their collective believe. And I've said this before on the podcast. What do these beat writers and journalists think is going to happen when the Trump era ends? Are we supposed to say, "Well, Greg, now that that's over, I guess we can go back to believing whatever the media says"? No! That's the exact opposite of what's going to happen. Let me put it this way. If all you beat writers, you journalists, and other digital media print fucks think you're going to get that cushy ivory tower senior editor job in the next, 8 to 15 years or whatever it may be, you're fucking kidding yourself. You think that article you wrote or that scoop you broke about Trump with anonymous sources is going to get you anywhere by 2024 or by the end of the decade? Not only will that position not be available for you fake news fucks, but my guess is by the time this decade is over, the corporate and digital media bubble will have burst, and you lying fucks won't even have a newspaper, a digital newspaper, or even Buzz D's nuts to write at anymore. So you all can go fucking fuck yourself. Okay, let's get to the staff report.
In my hand, I hold the staff report.
Actually, really quickly before we jump into this, I wanted to just do a follow-up. It was about something we did last week. It was about Tulsi Gabbard, and I think I kind of touched on her little riff with Hillary Clinton. And it's actually a perfect example of the Clinton machine in action. So for those that don't know, the backstory of the Hawaiian congresswoman is that she was actually the vice chair of the Democrat National Committee. Excuse me. And she was a Bernie supporter. And what's the one thing that you're not supposed to do in Washington when a Clinton is running for office? Cross them. And basically, what we found out through the Wikipedia leaks, well, what can be assessed from that is that while Clinton was taking all of her people and putting them into the DNC, this is clearly something Tulsi Gabbard, the chair of the DNC, was not a fan of. Or, I mean, I can't really sit here and tell you what she was or wasn't a fan of, but my assumption is, as Clinton was casually putting in all her people into the DNC, which is basically the apparatus for the National Democrat Party, someone who was supporting her opponent wasn't okay with that and resigned. So obviously Clinton sees that as a cross to her. So in the media, I can't remember when this was. This was definitely at least 3 or 4 weeks ago. She came out and basically called Hillary Clinton called Tulsi Gabbard a Russian agent, or a puppet of the Russian regime. And this is obviously payback for what she did 3 years ago. The Clintons don't forget. So it's just interesting if you're not really paying attention to politics and you just kind of casually see that story, you think, it's just two catty old ladies. Well, Tulsi's my age, so I probably shouldn't call her old. But it's an old lady being catty with, a younger person, which is ironic because that was not really. It's not ironic. Point is, you're literally watching politics in action in real time. This is a political hit job. In other words, if you cross me, I'm going to fuck you in the ass, in the media. And we basically kind of just watched that. Okay. So with all this impeachment nonsense going on, another major story that has been brewing in Washington is the Inspector General's report about the FBI, the FISA courts, and this political bias Trump campaign and Russia investigation, which was initiated by the FBI. This Inspector General's report was released earlier this month, and the Inspector General overseeing the report, Michael Horowitz, said in front of 2 Senate hearings the following days. The first hearing got a lot of attention, and I do believe that was in front of the House. I could be wrong about that. And the other ends up being overshadowed by this other thing that's going on that same week, Impeachment Day. So according to Rolling Stone's writer Matt I've been struggling how to say this guy's name. I think it's Taibbi. He'll go with Taibbi. We're going to go with that. He was recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I urge anyone who's listening to this to check that one out. This gentleman wrote an article that has 5 questions that still needs to be answered, and I'm right in lockstep with this guy. And I'm going to warn you, this is some fucking wonky shit. But I'm going to do my best to break it down or unpack it for you, if you will. But for the most part, the article explains everything in a pretty good caveman speak. Me, Joe, you listener. So, this is the first one. I'm going to just call him Matt, because I don't want to butcher the guy's last name. He asks, who is Joseph Misfud? And Matt writes, a congressional source last week said, I don't see any way the investigation can be above board if Misfud isn't a Russian agent. Horowitz said all 4 of the FISA warrant applications for Carter Page relied upon a core probable cause argument based on the idea that the FBI was conducting a legitimate investigation into Russia election interference. Horowitz wrote that the sole predication for that investigation was a statement former Trump aide George Papadopoulos made to an Australian diplomat named Alexander Downer. Papadopoulos allegedly told Downer that a Maltese academic named Joseph Misfud told him that Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Horowitz said that, if true, this first-hand account from a friendly foreign government was sufficient to satisfy the low threshold for opening an investigation. This was hardly the ringing endorsement of a justified probe many saw. All right, so to put that in, layman's terms, if you will, the FBI was relying on an Australian diplomat named Alexander Downer as a source and sole predication to launch an investigation into the Trump campaign. It was basically his statements that were giving the FBI the evidence to give to the FISA courts. That's what Matt was writing when he said... what Horowitz said, I should say, the sole predication for that investigation was the statement former Trump aide George Papadopoulos made to an Australian diplomat. So the FBI is claiming that this Australian diplomat made an accusation that a Russian agent named Joseph Misfud told a Trump campaign representative, which is George Papadopoulos, that fucking pretty Greek bastard, that Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Horowitz's statement, which he said, quote, if true, ... quote, isn't really something you'd be happy to hear. So here's what I'm trying to say. That statement where he goes, if true, this isn't something you want to you'd be happy to hear from the Inspector General if you're a Democrat. So one question remains. Was there any evidence that Horowitz, the Inspector General, found to implicate Misfud as a Russian agent? The author, Mr. Matt, continues. When Horowitz found no evidence that Misfud ever acted as an FBI confidential human source, pundits saw this as devastating to the Trumpian conspiracy theory that the FBI investigation was a setup. Maybe, but the original conspiracy theory was that Ms. Fudd was a Russian agent, and Horowitz, like Robert Mueller before him, found no evidence of this either. Okay, so here's what we got there. Since this is a Rolling Stone article, there's a little lefty bias baked into the cake. So when Matt says pundits saw this as devastating to the Trumpian conspiracy theory, what he's saying is the fake news media is using this as a talking point on their cable news stations, that Trump's belief that Miss Fudd was being used to spy on his campaign has now been debunked. However, Democrats are always moving the goalposts, like they are here, but the original conspiracy theory was that Ms. Fudd was a Russian agent helping the Trump campaign get dirt on Clinton, not that he was a spy for the FBI, and Horowitz and Mueller found no evidence or connections to the Russian intelligence agency. So clearly, Mr. Ms. Fudd has been turned into a false talking point for Democrats to push this bogus Russian narrative. I mean, what else could it be? Back to Mr. Matt. The Miss Fudd story was always bizarre. The professor introduced that's Greek bastards, right? The professor, and I can't fucking read. The professor introduced Papadopoulos, who'd been with the Trump campaign for about 10 minutes at that point, to a beautiful Russian woman he said was Vladimir Putin's niece. Putin doesn't have a niece. The woman, Olga, Polonskaya, worked for a Rome wine company. Ms. Fudd denied any foreknowledge of the DNC hack or making any offer to the Trump campaign, while Papadopoulos denied speaking about Russia at all to Downer, who told still a different story from the other two. If Ms. Fudd is not a Russian agent, the absurdity factor of all this multiplies. A years-long counterintelligence investigation will have been based on a botched game of telephone between three Westerners, that's Downer, Ms. Fudd, and Papadopoulos, of varying degrees of shadiness, with no Russian intelligence link ever found. It's like something out of a Graham Greene novel. The only thing missing is Papadopoulos handing Downer a barroom napkin sketch of a giant vacuum cleaner. Okay, so like I've been saying, a little bit to unpack here. So first off, I looked up Graham Greene. I still don't get that reference. Fucking liberal intellectuals. But that first sentence in that last paragraph I read is damning. Let's read it again. If Miss Fudd is not a Russian agent, the absurdity factor of all this multiplies. A years-long counterintelligence investigation will have been based on a botched game of telephone between three Westerners of varying degrees of shadiness with no Russian intelligence link ever found. And let's remember, everyone, that this article was written by a liberal Democrat in a liberal magazine. So the next question Mr. Matt writes is John Brennan, former head of the CIA, a liar? I'm going to kind of jump ahead and say yes, but let's see what Matt says. The Horowitz report is not kind to former CIA John Brennan. Brennan, in May of 2017, testified before Congress that he was aware of intelligence and information about contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons that served as the basis for the FBI investigation. Horowitz contradicts this. We also asked those FBI officials involved, whether the FBI received any other information, such as from members of the United States intelligence community, that the FBI relied upon to predicate Crossfire Hurricane. Crossfire Hurricane was the name of the probe into Trump, I believe. All of them told us that there was no such information. We also asked James Comey and Andrew McCabe about then CIA Director John Brennan's statements. Comey told us that while Brennan shared intelligence, he did not provide any information that predicated or prompted the FBI to open Crossfire Hurricane. Quote, if Brennan was not the... Sorry, there's no quote here. I'm still reading from the article. If Brennan was not the basis for Crossfire Hurricane, his testimony was wrong. Alternatively, If Brennan did not pass information that contributed to starting Crossfire Hurricane, that would mean senior FBI officials were not truthful with Horowitz. Something isn't right here. Okay, so here's what's being said. So the implication here, it's kind of serious. Either Brennan is a liar, or he did pass the information, and for some reason the FBI is ensconced in a shady culture of deception and lying and continued that practice during its interviews with the Inspector General. There's a fork in the road, and whichever choice you make, looking at you Democrats, will lead you to the end of a cliff or a rabbit hole. Regardless, someone from Obama's intelligence community is lying. It's just that simple. I mean, you have the CIA director saying, oh, no. I told the FBI what was going on. I'm the reason Crossfire Hurricane started. And then you have Comey and McCabe being like, I don't know what this guy is talking about. We didn't start this investigation until like the summer. So, like I said, someone's lying here. Either the CIA or the FBI. It's kind of a big deal. Anyway, Matt continues. In a related problem, Horowitz on pages 75 and 76 of his report says former Attorney General Loretta Lynch told his office in the spring of 2016, Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe pulled her aside and provided information about Carter Page, which Lynch believed they learned from another member of the intelligence community. Comey and McCabe both denied this, telling Horowitz they did not remember being told about Carter Page, with regard to Lynch's recollection of a conversation. Comey said he did not think it was possible for such a conversation to have occurred in the spring of 2016 because the FBI did not receive the tip from Alexander Downer concerning Papadopoulos until late July. To recap, and this is still Matt's words, not mine, the Attorney General recalled being told about Page and the FBI in the spring of 2016 and believed the information came from another intelligence service. The former head of the CIA testified he gave information to the FBI that was the basis for Crossfire Hurricane. Top FBI officials said they didn't remember any of this and insisted the investigation began with the Downer tip in July of 2016. 3 different stories, still from officials at the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department. Okay. So, like I was just saying earlier, the FBI and the CIA, one of them is lying. Now you got the Attorney General, who basically for those that don't know, structurally, the executive branch basically goes the president, and then his Attorney General, and then the Attorney General basically has the FBI, a lot of these intelligence communities passing information through. I mean, obviously the FBI are federal cops, so they're working in conjunction with the Department of Justice the same way your city cops or county cops work in conjunction with that district attorney. It's all fluid, or it's supposed to be. Now, I don't have kids. Well, anyway, what I was trying to say here is now you have 3 parts of it. Before it was the FBI and the CIA lying. Now, all of a sudden, the person running the Department of Justice, we don't really know if she's being that truthful. So I don't have kids. But I imagine if there's a box of cookies and they go missing before you, the parent, gets home. I guess I should say me, the parent, get home. But I don't have kids. But let's say I did. And these 3 fucks decided to get into this box of cookies that I was going to eat after work. And I get home from work and realize my fucking cookies are gone. So what am I going to do? I'm going to talk to them collectively, individually, or both. And what I end up with is 3 different stories of whatever the hell happened. And of course, if this is what's going to happen, your bullshit antennas are going to be up. Something stinks, and I don't have cookies. And this is essentially what's going on with the Department of Justice and the 2 intelligence agencies attempting a coup and apparently trying to cover it up at the same time. And again, here's the FBI caught doing something shady or lying, or both. We're back to that same fork in the road, and more Obama executive branch bureaucrats are lying. So, the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Justice, 3 different stories. Who stole my fucking cookies? Mr. Matt then goes on to write, this is kind of interesting. I wasn't going to put this in, but I decided why not. He asked, what is footnote 461? At the bottom of page 310, Horowitz describes an unusual communication to the FBI by a former confidential informant. A former FBI CHS, that's confidential human source, contacted an FBI agent in an FBI field office in late July 2016 to report information from a colleague who runs an investigation firm hired by two entities, the Democrat National Committee, as well as another individual who was not named, to explore Donald Trump's long-standing ties to Russian entities. The former CHS, confidential human source, also gave the FBI an agent. The confidential human source also gave the FBI agent a list of individuals and entities who have surfaced in the investigation firm's examination, which the former CHS described as mostly public source material. Horowitz goes on to say McCabe, the assistant deputy at the FBI, whatever, sent word to the FBI agent was not to collect any more information from this source and should not accept any information regarding the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Remember, Crossfire Hurricane is what they codenamed the probe into the Trump campaign. During testimony last week, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley asked Horowitz if the investigative firm in this footnote was Fusion GPS. Horowitz said he'd have to get back to him. This footnote raised a few eyebrows on the Hill. Among other things, it seemed to imply that the investigation firm was connected with the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane probe at that early junction in July of 2016. Why else would McCabe need to insist on not accepting information regarding Crossfire Hurricane? And I think Matt is saying this in regards to the FBI agent that was talking to the CHS. It would be interesting to know who this former FBI confidential human source is, why this person felt the need to reach out to the FBI about his colleague's firm, and why the FBI shut down this source. So this could be two things. On its surface, it looks like the FBI is being shady again. I mean, they really haven't given us a reason not to assume this. So if this source is Christopher Steele, who was gathering intel for Fusion GPS at the time, the reasons behind Andrew McCabe's motivations will only be known to him, kind of like maybe it's his insurance policy. But it could be the beginning of the cover-up starting, like I said, the insurance policy. It could be the FBI cutting ties to someone they now found unreliable. But honestly, it doesn't matter. The FBI's mishandling of the entire fiasco has muddled the waters to the point anything they do now looks shady. But Matt is right. It would be interesting to see what this source's motivations were for reaching out to the FBI about his colleague's firm. The FBI is shady. I actually just recently read that Peter Strzok guy, this is the FBI agent overseeing all the, at least he was overseeing mid-year exam, which was the code name for the Clinton email scandal. And he's right now suing his job back. So that's probably what I was reading. And in this filing, it came out that he was attempting to bury the Clinton email investigation. So it came to the attention of an FBI agent in a New York field office that the FBI leadership wasn't following up with him on emails that he found on an Anthony Weiner laptop. So what the field agent did is he went over Peter Strzok's head to the New York U.S. Attorney's Office, saying it feels like all of his inquiries into this Clinton email case were being ignored to the point it felt like some of the higher-ups were trying to bury it. And does anyone remember that Comey press conference at the end of October 2016, right before the election? That was because of this FBI agent reaching out to the U.S. Attorney's Office, who in turn reached out to the FBI and said, hey, what's going on with this? Trying to take down the Trump campaign with a fake FISA warrant and ignoring the Clinton's obvious federal crimes, only to have to come out and say that you're going to have to reinvestigate her emails right before the election is some kind of ironic. If you think about it, it also gave Hillary Clinton the talking point of blaming the FBI for her loss. Maybe if they weren't too busy trying to clean up her shit show that she left behind and cover her tracks, they wouldn't have had to come out and do that. Take responsibility for yourself, you hag. All right, anyway, going back to this article, Mr. Matt, he writes, will the fake news media correct itself? I think I added that part, the fake news, but he says, will news media correct itself? I mean, he's a lib, and he's in the media. Anyway, he goes on to say, the Horowitz report makes clear that multiple news cycles over the past few years were dominated by reports that were either incorrect or lacking factual foundation. These included assertions by multiple outlets that the Steele dossier was not central to the FBI's efforts to secure a warrant on Page, that the FBI found Christopher Steele and his dossier credible, that tales of FISA abuse were a conspiracy theory, one many claims Mother Jones called bullshit, that the memo written by Devin Nunes on the subject was wrong and had been debunked, that Russians blocked Trump from nominating Mitt Romney as Secretary of State, that Trump lawyer Michael Cohen was in Prague, presumably to meet Russian hackers, that a P-tape existed, that Russia's Alpha Bank and the Trump campaign were communicating via secret server, that the FISA warrant on Page must have been producing good intelligence in order to be renewed 3 times, and many, many other fake news stories. Again, I added that fake news part. The Washington Post is one of the few outlets to start the process of reassessing its coverage, noting in a fact check that a fair amount of the Nunes memo had been vindicated by Horowitz. Ari Melber of MSNBC also called out James Comey for being over his skis on the P-tape. These are the first steps, but Horowitz's findings suggest a much broader thematic, media foobar, that's still being ignored. Horowitz makes clear that the dossier by Steele was the linchpin, if not only the foundation, for the FBI's Trump-Russia conspiracy case. As one FBI agent says in the report, the minute we put the Steele election reporting in there, it goes from what you'd expect the FBI to be collecting in a counterintelligence context to a direct allegation about collusion with the Trump campaign. But the FBI had serious reasons to doubt this election reporting by January of 2017 when it learned Steele's primary source disagreed with his findings, describing the most explosive claims as coming from a conversation over beers made in jest. Worse, the FBI knew this source was a boaster prone to embellishment. FBI teams were unable to corroborate Steele's non-public findings. Yet reporters kept taking the bait on the key idea that Steele was in the know super spy whose conspiracy blackmail claims were taken seriously by investigators. Credulous reports originating from this premise about Comey's bombshell delivery of Steele's compromise claims to Trump, or news that a court found probable cause to believe Page was a foreign agent, or even in, hagiographic portraits of Steele as a real-life George Smiley, now look like fruit from a poison tree. Was it eaten knowingly or unknowingly? Wow, that was a lot. All right, so here's what we got. The media heard what they wanted to hear and reported it without verifying any of its context. Do you think if any of these reports coming out from Mr. Christopher Steele, but he was doing Oppo research on Obama, do you think MSNBC, CNN, do you think they're reporting this? Yet. No one attempted to check the validity of any of these stories because they all played into their confirmation bias about President Trump. If you've been consuming CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, or any news site, digital news site, cable news that leans left, they've been lying to you. And they've been doing it knowing that at the very least it's shoddy, misleading, journalistic malpractice that is honestly opinions being masked and wrapped up to look like responsible journalism. It's no different from me taking my cock out, taking a piss on your shoe, and telling you, hey Greg, it's raining. So Matt concludes this perfectly at the end of his article. He kind of gives them a pass, but it's obvious they were complicit in passing on fake news like North Korea's state media KCNA. Matt writes, If reporters were burned, they should be angry, and correction should be forthcoming. If there isn't an effort to reverse the wrong coverage, it will look like certain outlets, particularly cable news channels, CNN and MSNBC, were complicit in knowingly giving oceans of airtime to shaky stories. It's a bad look either way, but door number 2 is worse. So here's how I'm going to conclude this whole thing. I can't remember the last time I hit an hour. Wow. So I gotta say, it's kind of rich that pundits from MSNBC and CNN and other news sites have been referring to Fox News as state TV when they were the ones and only outlets reporting on these stories that happened to make it into their news cycle. Fox News and Devin Nunes were vindicated by this Inspector General's report. But then, on the other side of the coin, you have cable news channels, which Matt refers to, reporting and promulgating lies and shaky stories being leaked from Obama bureaucrats and Obama former controlled intelligence agencies. So that begs the question, wouldn't that make CNN, MSNBC, state TV? And that's a staff report.
We're trying to get a feel for how people spend their day.
The staff reports.
All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for listening to Ready Set Podcast. Please don't forget to check out our Facebook page. Check us out on Spreaker. Give us a like and a follow. Check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It only helps get the podcast out there. And just a reminder to everyone, you can now find the podcast on CastBox, Podcast Addict, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. This is your one-stop shop current events and politics podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast if you'd like to support us, and we'll see you next week, you fucks. Thanks for listening to the Ready Set Podcast. Check us out next week, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter and look for us on our YouTube channel, Ready Set Podcast.